Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of Verdi's Nabucco, live from the Metropolitan Opera House, which I saw at the Kino and de Cultura Brauerei. The conductor was James Levine, the production was done by Elijah Mashinsky, the sets were done by John Napier, the costumes were done by Andreana Neofitto, the lights were handled by Howard Harrison, and the filmographer was Barbara Willis-Sweet. Between 1960 and 1961, the Met premiered Nabucco with a cast that included Cornell McNeil in the title role and Leonie Rizanek as Abigail. It wasn't until 40 years later that this opera would reappear, but with an entirely different cast consisting of Juan Pons in the title role and Maria Gulegina as Abigail. And when I heard that Placido Domingo, Lyudmila Monastyrska, Jamie Barton, Russell Thomas, and Dmitry Beroselsky were about to participate in this year's production of Nabucco, I was really excited, but also quite skeptical in terms of how Domingo was going to sing it. But given his reputation as one of the finest singing actors of all time, perhaps he was going to surprise me. And I will definitely talk about the singers once I'm done covering the production. Okay, so my thoughts on the production. I really loved it because it had that sense of grandeur, and it was really, really well lit, and it was quite authentic. I really love the close attention to detail that these guys have when it comes to the scenery and the overall look and feel of ancient Babylon and ancient Israel in general. And the costumes were a very interesting mixture of middle-age costumes and even some costumes that we get from the olden times of the Babylonian period, which I really found was a very interesting mixture. And what more can I say about this production? It was very wonderful to look at from beginning to end. It was wonderfully lit, and the costumes were really, really elegant on all of the singers. And speaking of the singers, let's start off with Placido Domingo as our title hero, Nabucco. Now, I also heard him sing another Verdi baritone role about 2 years ago, and that was Francesco Foscari from Verdi's I Due Foscari, live from the Royal Opera House. And I thought he managed to do a very decent job in that role, as he's always done. What more can you expect from someone as great of a singing actor like Placido Domingo? He continues to give the goods as a singing actor. But if you ask me, I would have loved to have some younger, fresher Helden baritones or dramatic baritones a la Jan Lundgren, Johann Reuter, Thomas Johannes Mayer, and just a lot of other younger, fresher baritones of today who have a lot more meat in their voice. And of course, I have in my ears some of the greatest Nabuccos of the past, and the one who really stood out to be the most definitely had to be Gian Giacomo Guelfi, and I still have his robust hurricane of a sound in my ear, which I felt he defined the role of Nabucco really, really well. That's not to say that Placido Domingo didn't really hold up on his own. He actually did as a very great singing actor, as he's always been. It's just that he kinda lacks that true baritonal color, but regardless of those said shortcomings, he managed to sing the role really, really well. And even though there was that weatheredness that was completely in evidence in his voice, he's still a very committed performer, and one has to give him loads of kudos for just being so committed into this role and for throwing himself into this role with such aplomb, such nobility, and just a lot of dignity that he managed to add within this particular character. Sure, we could have loved to have a lot of fresher faces singing Nabucco, a la true Helden baritones or even true dramatic baritones. But one has to give kudos to Signore Domingo for what he had to offer with this particular role. Sure, his voice sounded a little bit weathered, but he still sang very, very well. And there were times that he had enough virility and charisma to not only sing this role well, but also act the part in such a very moving manner. And that's just where my respect goes for him because he's a very committed artist, as he's always been, and he always throws himself into this role, and he really is an intelligent singing actor. Not much more I could say about Señor Domingo, but he just continues to give the goods as a singing actor, even though a part of me feels like he should retire. But the charisma that he has in his eyes and the way he was able to move on stage was in complete evidence that I continue to be charmed by his overall stage presence and just how dedicated he is as a performing artist. Ludmila Monastrievska continues to be a sterling Abigail. I first heard this particular dramatic soprano about a year ago when she sang this role at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, and I thought she did a very, very great job in that role. And she continues to give the goods in this particular role and a lot of the dramatic soprano roles in general. She was properly fierce and she had a very commanding stage presence, and her acting was quite solid. She didn't go over the top, nor was she terribly wooden. She was just right as an actress. She gave Abigail her menace, her arrogance, her pride, and she was quite involving as a singing actress. But her assets were really on her voice, which continues to be a sterling, strong-sounding, and a round, rich, dramatic soprano instrument, which she used very, very well. And the scenes that she appeared in with Señor Domingo were absolutely fine all throughout. One can sense the overall conflicts that these two have, with Abigail being the supposed older daughter, and Nabucco, who fathered this particular orphan girl, who was nothing more than a slave who was adopted by Nabucco himself. One can sense the absolute battle of power that these two have, and it is just brilliant from beginning to end. Jamie Barton was a moving Fenenna, and this was an awesome, young, dramatic mezzo who I've been following for quite some time. I've been mostly following her career via YouTube videos, and from what I can hear from her voice, it is a round, rich, piercing, and an overall homogeneous dramatic mezzo instrument. And for someone who's still quite young, being in her mid-30s, she managed to dominate the stage with roles like Fricka and the second Norn, Waltraute, and just a lot of big dramatic mezzo roles in general. And she even sang the high mezzo role of Giovanna Seymour from Donizetti's Anna Bolena. For someone who's still quite young, her voice is in absolute tip-top shape, and her stage presence was very moving. I especially love her rendition of her aria O dischiuso il firmamento, which she sang so movingly, but at the same time had enough power and heft in her voice, which just made it a very awesome performance. And this is a mezzo I would really love to witness a lot more in the coming years. Then we go to Dmitry Beroselsky, who was a virile Zaccaria. I really love the color of his voice. It is a dark and blackish basso profondo / cantante sound. And his volume was just really, really excellent, even though there was some throatiness to be heard here and there. And there were times that some of his high notes did sound a little bit on the thin side, but nonetheless, they sounded really, really good. It's just that his intonation did tend to be quite throaty, and at times there were certain sounds that he made that didn't really appeal to me. But as a singer, he has one of the finest basso voices I have ever heard, and he has a very handsome and commanding stage presence. You could really feel that power, that grace, and that absolute charm that he has on stage, and he is just quite moving in this particular role. Yes, there are times that his facial expressions did tend to be a little bit monotonous, but he's still a very moving singer, helped with his dark, blackish, basso profondo slash cantante sound, and his singing was just fine all throughout, even though there were some moments of throatiness, but still, I have to give Signora Beloselsky loads of credit for being a very good musician and for being quite commanding as a singing actor. Russell Thomas was also in fine tip-top form as Ismaele. I first saw and heard this tenor as Don Carlo at the Deutsche Oper Berlin about 3 years ago, and I thought he did a very great job in this role. And I definitely got my wish as I saw him one more time as Ismaele from, of course, Verdi's Nabucco. And I thought he did a very, very solid job. He has a very elegant, dashing, and handsome stage presence, but more than anything, his spinto tenor voice was really, really handsome, well focused, brilliant, and it had that fine burnished tone that he was just quite magnificent in this otherwise thankless part. And his chemistry with Jamie Barton's Venena was so palpable that you could really feel that these two have wonderful chemistry, that you definitely feel that you want to root for them to have their happy ending. And what more can I say about Russell Thomas? He was a very fine spinto tenor, and he was an equally fine singing actor. And we even have such great contributions in the smaller parts, like Sava Vemitz's superbly sung High Priest of Baal. Even though there are times that his voice may not always appeal to me so much, it has potential. He's still quite young, being about 29 years old, but he has a very great future ahead of him, and I would love to see him in a lot more roles to come. And we even have Eduardo Valdez singing the role of Abdallo, whose superb character tenor voice really shone well with this particular role. And Danielle Talamantes as Anna was just lovely on stage, both vocally and dramatically. So overall, the singing found in the primary and secondary singers was just excellent all throughout. And the conducting done by Maestro James Levine was excellent. And the same thing I could say about how he handled the chorus and orchestra. It was just so masterful of how he handled not only the chorus and orchestra, but also the singers. And he just seemed to move everything so fluidly. So overall, with a very grand scale production, really awesome singing, and great conducting done by James Levine, this production of Verdi's Nabucco is an absolute must-watch. And for those of you who've watched this particular production of Nabucco, what did you think of it? Did you love Domingo in this particular role? Was there another singer who stood out to you so much? Did you love everything about this production? Did you also love Maestro James Levine's conducting? Comment below and let me know. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for my review of a Mala concert, which will be shown at the Berliner Philharmonica. So until then, good night, everybody.